Hi, this is Rachel from A Loving Place, and I am the author of Letters from a Better Me, How Becoming an Empowered Woman Transforms the World. Today I'm going to talk to you about abuse. It's a very triggering subject, and I know how important it is to have come to the surface. So I want to honor the people who are feeling and who this will trigger and who this will maybe trigger tears for. It's very important to honor how we feel and honor the feelings that are coming through us. So before we jump into this topic, I want to talk about the importance of a few things to know before we jump in. A little bit about me. As the author from Letters from a Better Me, one of the things I was asked was if you could get this book into one reader's hands, who would it be? And for me, it was that woman who was abused. That's the woman. That's the woman I wanted this book to get into the hands of, because I know that journey and I know where I had to go to heal and to become better and to break the patterns that were holding me hostage in my life. So that's the one reader. And when the audiobook came out, and it's been in the top 100 in Amazon audiobooks for domestic partner abuse, I'm glad to see it's getting into that person's hand that I wanted it to, because that was really important to me as a part of my journey through what I've been through to break the patterns of it, is to help someone else break the patterns of it. So, a little bit about my background. I have been into personal growth and self-help and spirituality and everything since I was very young. I started doing meditation at age 10. I have, I read very few fiction books. I tend to read self-help, psychology, personal growth, spirituality, along those lines. And in college, I studied human development. That's what my degree's in. So psychology, sociology. I minored in cultural anthropology because I truly want to understand people, and I can get a little obsessive on how much I want to understand people sometimes, because I can dive right in if I don't understand why a person is doing what they're doing. So one of the things that I've realized about myself is I had to create a picture in my mind. I had to create a picture that helped me process things. And one of the things that I use is an internal garden. So I think of my inner mind as an internal garden, and what is in that garden is weeds and vines and trees and beautiful flowers, but it's up to me what I put into this garden, what comes out of it, and what else I want to plant. So people could only give me seeds. At any point in time, someone can only give me a seed, and I have to choose whether to plant it, if I'm ready to plant it, if it's something that I even want in there, or if it's going to squash some of the other life in my garden that is necessary and important to me. So when thinking of the internal garden, when it comes to abuse, when abuse starts happening, I think of all these horrible weeds taking over the garden. I think of the smuggling vines that smother the beautiful trees, and it actually can smuggle the tree of life in our gardens. That's what I think of when I think of abuse happening. So our internal garden, it gets completely warped and we have no control over it, and it becomes just wild with nothing. Like, it's subconscious. We don't even know what's coming in and coming out of it at this point. So one of the seeds that I got that I was finally ready to plant, because that's the thing, is we can get seeds throughout our whole lives, and when we're ready to plant them, that's what matters. What matters when we're ready to plant them. So this seed hit me and was the beginning of the change that changed that pattern of self-abuse. This is from Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's on page 20. It's an older version though. And the limit of your self-abuse is exactly the limit that you will tolerate from someone else. If someone abuses you a little more than you abuse yourself, you will probably walk away from that person. That set off a light inside me so incredibly bright, because I didn't realize until that point in time how much I was self-abusing. I had no idea that what I was doing was self-abuse. So I didn't understand until that point why I would accept behavior and people would be like, why don't you leave? Why don't you do this? And I could not understand what was making me stay. What was making me stay in these abusive relationships that were hurting me? So that's what I had to come to realize, is it's because I was abusing myself. And sometimes when people think they're trying to help you get out of toxic situations, because of the way I was internalizing things, I was allowing that to create more shame and more feelings of unworthiness, which kept me in a cycle, which kept me in a place that was toxic. And it wasn't about the other person, it was about me. Because this is what I realized through a lot more seeds that I got, was the abusive relationship takes two people. It takes one person who's self-abusing and is triggering that inner rage inside them, and that rage has to come out and attack and make someone responsible for the way they're feeling inside without taking personal responsibility and accountability for their actions. And then the other person who's self-abusing tends to internalize that, and they've already been doing this long before they ever get into that relationship. They internalize this self-abuse, and it becomes something that makes them feel unworthy and unlovable. And so what they're projecting out is, I believe I'm unworthy and unlovable, prove it to me. And that's what I realized that I was doing. And so with all that, I really dove into the research. I really dove into research about how this happens. And where I found it happens is it starts in childhood, and it doesn't mean that everyone who gets into abusive relationships or self-abuses, doesn't mean they were abused by somebody else, but it's how we internalize what is said to us. It's how we internalize the things that happen in our family life, in school, in church, and all of that. That's what creates someone to start self-abusing. I used to be anti-religion in my head, because the message I internally attached to was that I wasn't worthy. I wasn't worthy of living. I wasn't worthy of being here. And that created such a self-hatred inside of me. I felt unworthy and unlovable from the one being that I thought supposed to love me no matter what. And that hurt. And it hurt so bad to the point where in my teen years, I was suicidal because of it. So it's really important to look at how people are internalizing it. No matter what the words are, it doesn't matter. It's how we internalize those words. Some people can take the word heal and go, I'm not wounded. So that's not going to help someone, that word, because it's how it's internalized. Forgiveness can be a negative trigger to some people and a positive trigger to others. God can be a positive trigger to some people and a negative trigger to others. All because of how we're choosing to internalize these things and these messages that are coming into us. And so that's just a person who hasn't experienced trauma in childhood. Can you imagine children who have to experience the trauma? And when we experience trauma, even if we are witnessing parents in a toxic, abusive situation where they're verbally, mentally, emotionally abusive, if we notice that as a child, we're learning this is how a man treats a woman, this is how a woman treats a man, this is what family looks like, this is what healthy looks like, and we know it's not. But that doesn't mean we're not going to internalize it that way as a child. And if we internalize that way as a child, we tend to pass patterns down. We tend to pass those roles down if we don't consciously look at it. So it's important to know the difference here between blame, self-blame, versus accountability and responsibility. Self-blame is a form of abuse. It's a form of abuse because it's internalizing the things we make mistakes on, the things that we've done, and creates this shame cycle where we can use it to beat ourselves up. Whereas accountability and responsibility say, I'm taking this in, I'm going to be accountable for it, responsible to change it. So it's more of an action, and we're not using it to abuse ourselves because we know we're on this human journey. We know we're on this journey to learn. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's going to be perfect. We're passing down some things unconsciously that our parents passed down to us, and we didn't know better, and we cannot judge ourselves against things that we did not know better. So that's the beginning. Next, there is only one person we can change. Only one person. The only person we can change is ourselves. We cannot change abusers. We cannot change people who are being abused. We cannot change our loved ones no matter how much we want to. We cannot change them. However, they're internalizing the world that's creating self-abuse, whether it's out in the rage, which becomes an abusive, they become the abusers, or if it's that unworthy and unlovable, which tends to mean we're going to be somehow abused somewhere in our lives, or that's that combination of both, and that's where a lot of that the suicidal teens and adults come from, is this inner anger within ourselves, and anger feeling of unworthiness and unlovable, and like we are a burden on the world. And that's all self-abuse. It's all self-abuse. When we treat our bodies disrespectfully, that's self-abuse. When we know that what we're doing is not good for us and we're doing it anyway, that's, we have to look at how we treat ourselves, because however we treat ourselves, we project out into the world. And whatever we project out into the world, we're going to get back as a mirror to ourselves to see how we're treating ourselves. So one of the quotes that really got formed the book Letters from a Better Me was by Byron Katie, and it was in a book called Hope Beneath Our Feet. The most attractive thing about the Buddha was that he saved one person, himself. That's all he needed to save. When he saved himself, he saved the whole world. Now, that is what made me realize, because I cannot change anybody else. All I can do is change myself to be the best person I can be. And with that, that's where the magnet comes in. So if we are matching energies, the magnets will stick together. And if the magnets stick together, there's a reason they're sticking together, because the energies align. So if one energy flips, let's say one person gets healthier and the other person stays sick and in their toxic situation, the magnet that gets healthier is going to start bouncing off. And both of them are going to feel this distance in between them. And that's when we grow apart, or the person who is staying the same pushes up. But that's their choice if they do. We can't stop ourselves from growing. And one of the things I love doing is, if people bounce out of my life, I thank God for it. I thank Him for it, because I believe that if the energies aren't aligned, we weren't meant to be in each other's lives right now for this moment. And I trust the journeys that every person's on, that they're going to end up exactly where they're supposed to be. So in an abusive relationship, if think of pheromones. Pheromones either attract each other or repulse each other. In the beginning, if there's someone self-abusing, that needs that person to blame, and then there's the other person self-abusing, so they need the person to blame them so that they can prove that they are unworthy and lovable, then those pheromones align. But once that person realizes that I am worthy and unlovable, it starts bouncing, and we start going in separate directions, which is the most beautiful thing. And it's about trusting our own journey through it, knowing that if we have abusive relationships, and it doesn't have to be in a romantic relationship, it can be in a family relationship, it can be in a work relationship, it doesn't matter. The more confident we feel in ourselves, the healthier we become, the healthier our boundaries become, and the easier it is for us to know how and when to walk away in peace. One of the things I learned a long time ago, and it just stuck with me because it was one of my seeds I was meant to plant, was I happened to catch a Dr. Phil, and he was talking to the guy from Partridge Family, and he was saying something about, you're not ready to leave a relationship until you can walk away in peace. And I was like, holy crap, that's a lot. Because when you're ready to leave, you feel a lot of things, but peace doesn't tend to be one of them. And what I realized is, as I got healthier, it doesn't matter what the other person's doing. I felt peace. I felt that peace. And because I felt that peace, I was able to walk away when it was time to walk away. And it was beautiful. Now, and sometimes if violence is threatened, that may not be an option, because we need to go get help. We need to get out of that situation, because either us or our loved ones are in a dangerous situation. And if our loved ones are in a dangerous situation when it comes to abuse, getting them out is the best thing we can do right then. But if we go out and get out, we need that help to make sure we stop our cycle of abuse, so we stop passing it down, so we stop feeling it, so we don't regurgitate that cycle and keep having it happen just with different people. And because the self-abuse has to stop. That's what has to stop, is the self-abuse. So how a child internalizes it, how we internalize it, and create that pattern of self-abuse. How we talk to ourselves, it matters. It matters. If we have teenagers who are talking badly to themselves, this is what we need to look at. We need to look at that. We need to look at what in them doesn't feel worthy. What in them doesn't feel lovable? What in them is creating this inner rage against themselves? So that we can help them break patterns before they start in other relationships in their lives. One of the reasons writing Letters from a Better Me was so important to me was because how I helped myself was through books. I read so many books, and I believe that everyone who is meant to read a book when it comes to the things that they've prayed for in their life, if they've prayed for something to start, and a book shows up in their life and they read it, and they can read hundreds of books, and all those books are different seeds, and they're necessary seeds. If you get this feeling to read a book when you're in crisis, I believe that's a seed. For me, there are certain books that I needed, not only because I studied human development, I studied the learning process. I know that I need to absorb it through reading it. I know I need to absorb it through hearing it. I know I need to absorb it through writing it. So when I wrote my book, it was because all those elements were in there to help people really process the information. And I was so happy when it was put into audiobook, because I know how much I put on headphones and would walk around my house listening to audiobooks that had the way I wanted to be thinking in my head, going over and over and over, because I knew that the self-talk that was happening in my head wasn't healthy. And I needed and wanted to feel better. And I knew in order to do that, that self-talk had to change. So I had to hear it from all different angles. Just like we're inundated, we can be inundated with shame and guilt and hatred and fear all the time if we want, by turning on the TV if we want to. We can look on our Facebook feeds if we want. And if we're surrounded by people who are spewing toxic and hurtful energy, then it's going to wear on us. So be conscious of what you're feeding into your minds. When it comes to self-abuse, we have to look at it in a way that's going to help heal it. One of the books that's a wonderful book for helping with self-abuse to kind of really see it is Mirror Work by Louise Hay. I had already done her work in mirrors before this book came out, so it did really help me look into the mirror and acknowledge what I was saying to myself, acknowledge how I was talking to myself. And if you're saying abusive things to yourself, then it becomes a norm if we hear it outside of us, if we hear it from a boss, if we hear it from a partner, if we hear it from family members. If we change that inner language, if we change the way we look at ourselves, if we change the way we talk to ourselves, our outer world changes because of that. So the one and only person that we have to work on is ourselves. We can't force anybody to do anything they're not ready for. I know whoever is meant to listen to this from start to finish is going to hear it. And they're going to get whatever seeds that they're supposed to get. And if someone doesn't attach to what's in here right now, it's not meant for them. And I don't take any of that personally, because I know what my journey is. And I'm living my journey. And what I put out, if it helps somebody else on theirs, then that's awesome. It's a seed they can choose to do with what you want. It's a seed that's there. So I do hope this helps people. I am going to put links in the comments afterward, because one of the things I do know is when we are unconscious of what abuse is, especially emotional and verbal and mental abuse, we don't know what we don't know. So I want people to see all the different forms of abuse there are. So I'm going to put that in there. And I'll put in a couple links about, actual abuse situation type things to help with specifics like narcissistic abuse and all that kind of stuff. If you are a person who has dealt with a narcissistic abuser, this book, Power, I have done so much research on different forms of abuse, and narcissistic abuse is one of them that I dove deep into, looked at tons of research about. But I love this book. I don't want to butcher her name, but I'm sure I will. Shahida Arabi. This book, it was so eye-opening to me on things that I didn't understand. But what I also loved about it is she gives a lot of tools in the book. And those tools are things that I've used to get myself healthier. So I was like, oh yeah, I totally support this, because it was all things that I've done. And that kept me healthy and took me on that inward journey. But it also helped me not take narcissistic abuse personally, which is so important if you're dealing with any kind of narcissist in your life, is to not take their actions personally. And the more we treat ourselves with love and respect and honor the person we are, the less personal we will take things from other people. Because if we're taking something personally from somebody else, it's because we're attaching to something in that. And in order not to attach to that, we have to be strong. We have to have our inner strength. Because I know my mom used to say to me, it's none of your business what other people think of you. And until I dove in and cleared up my self-talk, that didn't stick. Because I would take it so personally when someone would criticize me. Like, you have all these media trolls out there that say some very hurtful things to people, like you should kill yourself, and all these types of things, that the ugliness of humanity can come out. But you have to remember, those people are not healthy people. And one of the best things I love, one of the best little things I love is, consider the source. If someone's spewing hatred, if that's not the way you want to live, you don't have to take it in. It's not yours, it's theirs. That's their self-abuse. That's their self-worth stuff. Healthy people don't say toxic things to other people. They don't intentionally hurt other people. Healthy people don't do that. Healthy people help lift each other up. That's what healthy people do. If that's not what we're doing, then we need to look at ourselves and see why. And see what about ourselves don't we like to the point where we would want to take somebody else down. But that's each and every person's journey for themselves. If a person is in that place, I know based on my health and my boundaries now that I can walk away. I can have a healthy boundary and say how I feel without it being like two kids attacking each other, which when two people are self-abusing, it becomes like two children attacking each other, like two teens. And when you're healthy, you don't feel that need to do that. And that's what's beautiful when we know our worth, is we don't have to unnecessarily attack anybody else. And we don't attack ourselves. We know we're going to make mistakes. We know we're going to, have growing experiences. We need those. That's part of our journey. So with that, I hope this got through to whoever it was meant for. And I will be back again with more to say about some subject. I think next week I'm going to cover more about perspective and truth and how we choose to live. And I just wish everybody a beautiful day. And if this hits you in some way and you notice a pattern that you may have, don't beat yourself up, because that's only going to continue the cycle. Just look at it and say, how can I be better now? That's what matters. Right now. What can we do to do better now? Learn from our mistakes and move past them. Feel feelings. Really let yourself feel them. Don't hide from what you feel, because if we hide from what we feel, it can suppress and become self-abuse too. And self-abuse will always come out. It will always hit somebody else. So if we take care of ourselves, we take care of the world. With that, thank you all for whoever was here right now, and whoever watches the playback. I hope you get something out of it, and I will talk to you again soon. If you like what you hear, you can like and follow From a Loving Facebook From a Loving Place. I also have the Letters from a Better Me YouTube channel, and FromALovingPlace.com to read a lot more about my journey. Have a wonderful day.